Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it 1 minute to give our colleagues a little bit more time to join us, but we're very happy that you're able to join us today. And we're looking forward to um, sharing with you some resources and also hopefully hearing a little bit about your experiences. So thank you for joining, and we will be starting here in a minute. So in the meantime, if you don't mind introducing yourselves in the chat so we can know who's in the room, if you'll share your name, your location, your district, and also your role within community schools or within your district. Okay. And also, we will be sharing a document with links to the resources that we'll be sharing. So you'll you'll be able to find that in the chat. And if you lose it, we'll continue to post it throughout just so you can find it if you lose access to it. But in the meantime, if you can introduce yourselves in the chat, that would be great. So thank you all. All right, great. Hamilton Unified. Hello there, Rachel, Paola, Stockton Unified. Great, great that you guys are here today. Santa Paula USD is in here with us too. All right. All right. So we gave it a couple of minutes. So thank you all for joining Kern High School. Great to know that you guys are here. So today we wanted to share a few more resources. As you guys know, Gabe has been building supports for community schools, and we want to share some of those resources with you guys so that you are aware of just different practices, activities, strategies that we recommend, and also that we feel will be able to help you in your transformation in your community schools. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Ruby Flores, and I'm the director of our lead department, our Learning Engagement Advocacy and Development Department. And I'm just very, very glad and happy to be here with you. This is our second web event that we have. And we will also be sharing with you the link to our community schools website where we will be uploading all of the resources that we will be sharing with you. And you'll also find the previous recording from the previous session, just in case you missed it. And we'll also be uploading this presentation. So just in case you want to refer to it later, or if you want to share it, we recommend please share away. It will be an open source resource. So the more people have access to this information, the better. We want it to be out there. We want people to have these resources as well as you guys are working in your transformation and your implementation of community schools. So just to give you a little bit of background on Gabe and our lead department. So, in our department, we provide professional learning for educators, families, students, pretty much the whole ecology of a district. For us, it's important that we're coordinating the resources and the supports that we're providing to the different partners that we serve to ensure that you really have all the tools available and also the practices to be able to support the development of all of your community, right? So just again, we'll share a lot of this information in the links document that we'll be sharing with you in the chat. You'll also find the link to the slides, just in case you want to refer back to any of the information. I do want, just if anybody has any burning questions as I go through the presentation, as we go through the strategies, the activities, please feel free. I do want this to be more interactive. We're not going to go into breakout groups, but I do want to hear from you if you have ideas, thoughts to share. I will give you a few tasks to do to just reflect on. And if you can and open to sharing in the chat about your experience, that would be great, because part of this is also to bring people together that are doing similar work so that we can network, right? And we can learn from each other. So the more you're able to share, the better it will be for everybody in the group. So we look forward to hearing from you in the chat. And also, if you have any comments that you want to share out loud and with the entire group, just raise your hand or let us know, and we will be able to support you. I also wanted to let you know that I do have three colleagues with me. Laura Diaz, who's part of our family and community engagement lead services. And then we also have Andrea Gonzalez, who is part of our support staff, and also Tiffany Adamewante, who is also part of our support staff. So they'll be sharing with you all the links in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. So the purpose of today and the series of these webinars is to support you as you're designing and strengthening your community, and also to provide you ideas and supports for all of the for the four pillars of community schools. We want to make sure that as you're working through the systems that you're creating and developing, you are able to look at it through a lens of not just transformation, but also sustainability. For us, it's really important that when you come and learn from us, we leave something behind, right? We leave systems, we leave practices that you're going to be able to implement, that you're going to be able to use to build capacity within the different contributors in your ecology, and that are going to support you in your implementation. So with that said, if you were here last time, this is just going to be a quick overview of how we're approaching this work. If you were not here, then you'll hear about it, and also you can learn more from the previous video that the previous webinar that we had. So as CABE, we want to ensure that as districts are engaging in this transformation of community schools, that we're looking at our systems in our community as an ecology, meaning that every piece of the puzzle, right, needs to be connected, and also every contributor, which we call contributors, our learners, our teachers, our families, our educators, our students, our community members, everybody comes and contributes something to the learning environment. We are, as a school, we're always the result of the interactions and also of the lived experiences of the humans that we serve. And so we want to approach this through that lens of everybody in our community has the ability to impact what happens in the classroom and how our students are engaging with learning, and also how they're becoming and developing as human beings. So when we think about it and we think about this through community schools, we want to address and connect how we're meeting the needs of all of our contributors, right? So if we're going to address the needs of students in the classroom, then we also need to think about how the needs of our teachers, right? And then also the needs of our parents, and we want to coordinate those supports that we're providing so that we're building on each other's strengths. And that is the purpose of what we do. As we know, we have different forces that shape student learning. As we said, we have what happens in school, we have the teacher, the expertise, we have students, we have school climate and culture, and different mindsets about learning, teaching, and learning. But we also have the external, which is what happens outside, the funding, the policy, how our community advocates for certain programs, the engagement of our community as a learning community, from our board members to our community, and how they work and interact together. So thinking of that, as CABE, we want to re-envision how we address the needs of schools. We want to really think about how we work in a very complex system, right? That requires that we're continuously reflecting on how we're serving the different levels of our partners, right? And then also how we're ourselves self-organizing, adapting, changing, responding, which is going to be something that's going to be always ongoing. And for that, there needs to be systems. There needs to be a blueprint to help us do that. And Gabe, if what we use, and this is Gabe's approach to creating those adaptive systems, is through the seeds blueprint, which is what we use to create the services that we provide to our partners. And we want to share it with you because this is something, a blueprint that you can also use as you're developing structures to support the different groups that you're serving. And so the School Ecology for Equity, Democracy, and Sustainability has four core practices. And we're gonna show you a little bit about it, and then we're gonna actually take one of those core practices, and we're gonna see examples on how that is implemented. And I'm gonna play this video.
Imagine if our schools
Let me make sure that the sound is playing. Yes. All right. Let's go ahead.
Imagine if our schools weren't just buildings or systems, but living ecologies, full of connection, growth, and possibility. What if every student, teacher, and family was part of a thriving community, nurtured and valued like plants in a flourishing ecosystem? That's the vision behind the SEEDS framework. Schools, ecologies for equity, democracy, and sustainability. SEEDS isn't just a checklist, it's a way to grow schools where everyone can belong and thrive. It's the foundation for building communities that are equitable, collaborative, and truly responsive to everyone's needs. So, what are the four elements that make up SEEDS? Roots and empowerment, equity and action, co-created innovations, and sustainable transformation. Let's break down how these elements help every learner and every school grow strong together. Let's start with roots and empowerment, the foundation of every thriving school community. When students, families, and educators are empowered, they anchor the school like strong roots anchor a tree. Their voices matter, each one helping the school grow stronger and more connected. When everyone belongs, schools become places of possibility and growth. Next, equity in action. This means meeting each learner's needs and removing barriers to success. Equity isn't just a goal, it's a daily practice that shapes every lesson, policy, and relationship. By focusing on empowerment and equity, community schools become places where every learner can thrive. Now let's explore the final two elements of the SEEDS framework: co-created innovations and sustainable transformation. Co-created innovations happen when students, families, and partners design solutions side by side, sparking creativity and building stronger communities. These partnerships turn ideas into action, making real change possible from the ground up. Sustainable transformation is about nurturing growth over time, through care, commitment, and ongoing collaboration, just like tending a flourishing garden. When we nurture all four elements, roots of empowerment, equity in action, co-created innovations, and sustainable transformation, our schools become ecosystems where every learner can thrive, now and for generations to come.
So that is the approach that we want you to consider taking. How are you using those four elements of those four elements to build on what you already have, on the strengths of your community, by engaging into reflection and also creation of systems that are going to ensure that your community is valued, it's seen, but it's also served. So the first one, roots and empowerment, we actually focused on that one the previous session. So if we're not going to address that one this time around, but if you want to learn more about it, feel free to watch the previous session. Today we're going to focus on equity in action. So last time we talked about how we want to ground our work on the stories of our communities. We want to learn what about their lived experiences. We want to learn about their funds of knowledge. We want to learn what they need from their perspective, and then from there we think of what trainings, what learning opportunities, what engagement opportunities can we provide for our families to feel empowered. Today we're going to focus on equity in action. And that means we're going to think about how we're using inquiry, how we're using reflection, and also data to identify the areas of need, but also the inequities and how we respond with practices that are really truly going to create equity, are going to create justice and access. And for that, I'm going to share a few strategies with you. The last two webinars, because we do have two more coming up, one in April and one in June, which we'll share the dates with you. We'll focus on co-created innovations, and then the last one on sustainable transformation. But today, I want you to really think about how you're enacting equity in your practice and how you're ensuring that, again, the entire ecology is engaging into that inquiry and that reflection to ensure that everybody is working towards the same goal of equity. And that only happens when we build shared leadership and sustainability with our families, right? And with our community, with our community members, with our educators or principals. We have to be on the same page when we're thinking about how we're addressing our students, our families, or how we interact with them and how we engage with them, and that we're creating true opportunities for real engagement and real participation, and not just, which is great that we have a lot of systems already, like open house and community nights, right? But how are they actually becoming members of our learning environment so that they're not just there visiting, but they're actually part of the ecology, and they see themselves like they belong to it. Why this matters, again, because we want to ensure that we are transforming our schools into thriving ecosystems. So we want you to really think that through, right? Instead of working in silos where teachers do one training, parents get other type of training, and students and principals, right, have other priorities. How are we aligning the priorities from our entire ecosystem, but also ensuring that we're keeping their needs in mind? So, with that said, we're going to focus again on equity in action, which this means how are we building capacity about reflecting on biases and assumptions? How are we engaging all of our educational partners in advocating for equity by building that collective appreciation and empathy? We have to not just be here to serve, we should also care, right? Not just teach, but we also want to care about how what we're doing, our teaching, our practices are impacting our students and our families as human beings, right? How are we supporting their development as humans, and how are we ensuring that there's access for them into the system? And if there isn't, how do we create it? How do we change the system? Community schools is not just changing your community, it's changing the system. And the system needs a lot of revamping because we know that right now, our educational system does not really engage in this mindset of we're an ecology. We're all in this together and we're all part of it. So how do we dispel stereotypes? How do we make sure that we're uplifting our students' assets, our families' assets, and that even when we have well-intentioned we're well intentioned. Sometimes ourselves, even though we fight for equity, we fall into that language of deficit, sometimes without even noticing. So it is about building our self, it's building our a reflective mindset to ensure that we're paying attention and we're being aware, building awareness, and being able to identify inequities. So, with that, I'm going to share with you a few strategies that I want you to practice with me, because the best way to learn is by practicing. So, this is where I'm going to ask you to either share it loud or share in the chat. But I want to share the first one, which is we shared this one last time, but I wanted to bring it back because this is going to guide what we do. These are the Liberatory Design Mindset cards from the National Equity Project from Stanford University, which is a great, easy tool to start thinking about how our families, not just our educators, but also our families, are understanding equity. We use it a lot with educators, right? And we think as educators, we need to think of equity, but we can't really create true transformation if our families are also not not aware, right, of what equity actually looks like. So you'll find this resource, and you'll also find it in the links document. But what I wanted us to do is practice two very specific mindsets. One is to think about how we're practicing self-awareness. So that means who are we, and how does that determine how we design, how we create, how we meet, how we come up with decisions, make decisions, right? And so for that, we want to think and acknowledge and challenge our own assumptions, our assumptions about our families, our students, our assumptions about ourselves, because sometimes we also assume things about ourselves. And self-awareness is not just about, how I see everybody else, but also how I see myself. What habits do I need to maybe overcome, right? Because again, we all grew up with bias. That's human, right? Trait, but that doesn't mean that we can't be mindful, we can't be reflective of how those biases affect our actions. And I also want you to practice today the one that says recognize oppression. So learning how we see oppression, being able to identify it, because sometimes it's right in front of us, but we're not used to looking for it, or it's just so ingrained and so systemic that we don't necessarily see it. But how do we become more proactive at specifically always looking for those oppressive practices or frameworks or even just ideologies that run what we do as educators? So I want you to take a look at these, and I'm going to give you just a minute to read through the cards. Why practice how? And I want you to focus on the how, because we're going to watch a video and we're going to practice self-awareness, and we're going to practice recognizing oppression. So I'll give you a few minutes, a few seconds just to browse through the mindset cards. Alrighty. And again, you have access to these through the links. So we're going to now watch a video. And if you were in person, I would ask you raise your hand if you watched this video. And if you haven't, and if you have, I want you to think about how those two mindset cards apply to this message. And if you haven't, I ask the same, right? But really think through how is this also, how does this show up in the work that we do with our families and our students and our teachers as well, if we're working with teachers? So I'm gonna play the video, and then we're gonna have a quick chat discussion or online discussion.
Says that I started as a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria. I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books, but because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me, as an African, was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously.
Okay. So it's a great video and it's a great message that keeps going, but I want us to stop here for a minute. And I do want to give you a few minutes to reflect and on the perspective and on the message about the danger of a single story. How is this important for our work with our communities as we're transforming, trying to work on transformation? How do we ensure that there isn't just a single story told about English learners, about students of low socioeconomic status, about our students that are facing an achievement gap? How are we making sure that there isn't a single story that we're believing and that we're creating biases we're making assumptions without even knowing them. So I am going to have you think through them, and I'm going to skip this because I want you to really think through it. And I'm going to skip to this because I want you to reflect on a time. Tell me about a time when. And I want this to be about you. Tell me about a time when someone used language to describe you that made you uncomfortable. Or tell me about a time when you felt insulted or discriminated by how people were treating you. Tell me about you and your story. So I'm going to give you a minute to think. And if anybody wants to share aloud, I would love that. But if you just want to share in the chat, I will give you a few minutes to think through your story and write it in the chat. Okay. You're writing, keep writing. Would anybody like to share a story or your reaction to the video? How does the video make you think about the stories that we tell, the narratives that we tell, the narratives that we believe without sometimes even knowing our families and our students and their real lived experiences? All right. So keep writing if you're writing. And if not, now I want to share with you a couple of ideas and resources. So, one of the things that we want is exactly do this. Tell me about a time when. Give me a story about your life. Tell me something that I should know about you so that I can understand you as a human better. Yes, as a student, yes, as a learner, but also about how to engage you as a student, how to engage you as a parent, as a community member, so that you can feel welcomed and so that we can reflect on how our systems are designed to either include or prevent our families from feeling like they belong. So this in itself is a strategy. Let's tell our stories. Let's ask our families to tell their stories and let's analyze them for what they need us to do to make them feel welcomed. And thank you for sharing. I see some of you sharing your stories in the chat. And again, anybody likes to share aloud, I would love that, but I understand if you're multitasking. So with that said, here are a couple of other ideas, right? We want to use two approaches so that we can really focus on those human values, so that we can identify those systems of oppression that our families have encountered, so that we can change them or we can transform them, right? Or that we can get rid of them. We also want to think about our own biases because sometimes we get that student or we get that family that you hear from previous teachers or you hear from having a sibling in the past, right? Or because we see them in the office all the time. But how well do we know them and what biases do I need to be aware of when I'm thinking about my family? So one of them is approaching this through a biography driven lens. So how do we capture students' biographies? How do we analyze about how those biographies influence how they learn, but also how we teach and how we must adapt our instruction to serve their needs? And also, how do we ensure that we're providing culturally responsive pedagogy, instruction practices. Because if I don't know them, I don't know their motivations, I don't know their life stories, then it's going to be really hard for me to create instruction that's going to adapt or it's going to reflect their experiences, just like the video that we just watched, right? We don't want a single story. We want to learn the stories. The other approach is narrative inquiry. So again, tell me about a time when. Tell me how you do this. Tell me about what you like, because this is going to help us identify our students' assets and ideas and opinions as well, right? We want to ensure that we are taking into consideration the stories that they know and that they live by. What are the norms at home and how do they behave at home and can I bring that into the classroom or into our community? It also gives us a tool to ensure that we're looking at everything we do through the student and the family perspective as well. And for that, we do have these resources that are included in the link document. So, and this comes from Dr. Socorro Herrera's work on biography-driven instruction. So it's a student biography card that we can use to really think about how well we know our students academically, but then also the narrative inquiry interview template and for both teacher. This one we have teachers, families, and students, so that we can really get to know their stories and we can get to the root, right, of who they are and what they need. So these are two resources that we would like to share with you. We also have another point of reflection for you. Now, as we're thinking about how we're gathering our students' stories and how we're learning to look at through the lens of their lives and not just through one single story, we also want to think about how we are reframing from deficit perspective language and a lot of times is language that is policy. And so how do we change that to an assets framing language? And I'm going to, and I hope you're reading the stories in the chat, which I'm gonna hope, if you don't mind, I would love to record and share, because sometimes this is what we want to share with our families, right? It's important for us to be able to reflect on our own stories so that our families can connect to, a lot of us, most of us have also gone through some sort of discrimination or some sort of interaction where we didn't feel valued or seen or heard. And it's important for us to reflect on when that happens to us so that we can really understand how that also happens to our families and we can build those true connections. So thank you all for sharing your ideas. And I recommend that you do this with your families and your students and your teachers as well. And with that said, again, we're going to watch this video and I really want you to think about what deficit-based framing and language and how we use language within our system and within the systems that we're building. And go ahead and play.
When you set out to do good and help someone or a group of people, how do you describe them? I'm a master's student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and today I want to talk about the language we use to characterize the people we want to support and uplift. Let's examine the framing of this hypothetical mission statement. We are a food aid organization designed to support at-risk families. Or we're a culinary program aimed at underperforming youth. These are likely well-intentioned, but they use a deficit-based lens where we define people by their problems, instead of recognizing the obstacles they're facing as systemic exclusion and discrimination that is external to the individual. This is so common in our society and media, we learn to label people by their problems, which culturally then grooms us to combine these two ideas together. Compare this to asset-based framing, which describes people based on their desires and contributions in face of challenges and sees them as valuable even before they receive help. So to rephrase, we could try something like, we're a food aid organization on a mission to disrupt food apartheid by distributing fresh groceries to working class BIPOC families. Now it's clear the fault is in the system, not the people. You may be thinking, what's the big deal? These are just words. But the thing is, deficit-based framing also affects the way we go about trying to create change. You may have heard the term poverty porn, where media will go document in great detail the conditions of those who are suffering in order to elicit support for a certain cause. Damage centered research follows in a similar pattern, where researchers go out to document the pain and brokenness of certain groups of people as to hold those in power accountable. These approaches end up perpetuating the idea that those being helped are one dimensional, broken, and hopeless. It assumes that these people are not doing anything to improve their own situation and implicitly calls upon a theory of change that is predicated on the proof of harm. In her open letter suspending damage, Professor Eve Tuck asked researchers to consider the long-term consequences of, quote, thinking of ourselves as damaged. She then offers a new approach, which she calls a desire-based framework. That means understanding the complexity, contradiction, and self-determination of the groups that have experienced harm but are so much more than just that. This means creating research trajectories that are critical of past realities but are more centered on future aspirations. I'll let you go ahead and think about how this applies to your own work, and make sure to come back next week for more learnings.
All right. So, as the video mentioned, how are we making sure that our terminology, our language is framed through an assets lens and not a deficit lens? How do we make sure that the messages that we have, our mission statement, our vision statement, our goals that we create for our students, right? And that means think about your learning goals, think about IP goals, think about all of that language that we think about, that we use for, especially when we think our students that are receiving intervention, right? How are we making sure that we're framing our students and we're referring to our students through their assets and not through deficits or deficit mindsets? So with that said, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we're looking at, again, our documents, our systems, our master plans, and we're really thinking about the language that is included in there. Again, transformation starts from the system, right? We have to ensure that as an ecology, we're all aligned with the language that we're using when we're describing the people that we serve, and that we're describing them through their assets and not through what the system has created, the labels that the system has created to address needs as opposed to build on strengths. So, with that said, I did want to share a few examples. And if you can, in the chat, I want you to look through some of these and help me, and let's help each other identify some well-intended but still deficit frame language in these different mission statements. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to read through them. And then I want you to share in the chat the language that we should probably be looking and being very, very careful, right? That we're changing as we're addressing our communities and those people that we serve. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to look through them. And if you'll, in the chat, if you'll write some of the words that you notice that we might need to go through our systems and our documents and see how we're using some of this language. Underserved, remediation, deficiencies. Struggling communities. We've all heard and used, because we've all used the term struggling reader, struggling learner, right? What other ones do you see? Lack of opportunity, limited access, improve their quality of life, which again, we're making assumptions about what quality of life is for everyone. And for all we know, they have a great quality of life, but we need to ensure that they have access, right, to all of the resources that are and should be available to them. Yes. So the purpose of this is for us to really think about and reflect on our blind spots, right? What is my positionality as a community schools coordinator or director or principal or teacher, educator? And how am I using language to refer to the people that I'm trying to engage and that I'm trying to uplift, right? And to bring into my community. And how are we making sure that we're doing this systematically? Again, meaning that this should be reflected in the documents that we share, our documents that guide instruction, our documents that guide our programs, our master plans, our mission and vision statements, our student goals. How do we do that? And how do we ensure that we are being reflective of the language that we're using, again, systematically? So I'm going to give you these. Again, another strategy, right, is we can review the mindset cards and we can share about our biases. We think about how, what language, what deficit framing language is, can do we use? Because first of all, if we're not reflective ourselves, then we're not going to be able to guide other people to be reflective. We have to really try it out first, right? Who am I? What's my positionality? What are my biases? What is the language that reflects those biases? And how can I address that deficit framing within my own practice? But also, how do I build capacity so that as a system, as an ecology, right, we are looking at all of our contributors through an assets lens. So again, this is again, and you have access to these slides again. So if you want to do this reflection activity with your teams, because this is about ensuring that we're implementing equity in our transformation of community schools, and that it starts from from reframing and revamping, transforming the systems, and that it is the first piece we want to do is how are we using language and how is our language reflective of how we view our community and our community members. Okay. The last thing that we would want you to do, and for sake of time, we're not going to do here, but just want to leave you with the idea is how to reflect and develop an action plan for reviewing your district messaging, right? Again, through an assets framing. So creating a list of some of this deficit language, right? And looking for it through our messaging, through our websites, through, again, all of our documents, but then also how do we train our families, our teachers, and even our students to ensure that they are using that assets-based lens, that we are building that empathy towards each other, that we're building that care for each other, and that we're looking beyond the stereotypes and the biases that we have, and that we're being reflective of that. Again, all of this is how do we do this in a systematic way to ensure that it doesn't just stay within one group of our community members or our contributors, but that everybody in the ecology is engaging in this same type of learning. Again, like we said, all of this needs to be transformational and to be sustainable. This use, for example, use of language, use of understanding the stories of our families, it applies throughout the entire ecology. We want to learn the stories of our teachers, of our students, or of our families. Our families, we want them to reflect on the stories that they bring and they have, the stories that they live by, the stories that their grandparents told them about, and the life lessons that they've learned through the narratives of the people that they engage with. So again, think about it that way, and that's why we ask you to think through that blueprint of how do we make sure that we're getting to the root of who our families are, that we're looking for ways to empower them, but we're also centering that that equity into everything that we do and building that mindset. Because without that mindset, equity just becomes another buzzword, right? That mindset also needs to drive practice. And that's why we bring you the equity cards, the mindset equity cards, but then also the other strategies that are going to actually put that into action. How do we identify biases, oppression, and how do we systematically change that by changing the language that we use on how we refer and describe our communities. All right. So now I'm just going to leave you with a few guiding questions. How do you ensure that your entire ecology is being reflective of their biases? How do you change your language? And how is this how is reflecting through this entire ecosystem important to ensure that, again, we're reaching true transformation? All right. With that said, I want to thank you all for being here, for sticking through this after school. I did want to share with you a few resources. As we mentioned, right? GABE has been working with districts and has created a lot of this work, a lot of these strategies to be able to support districts as they're engaging in their transformation of their community schools. Again, looking through an ecosystem lens, how do you identify the needs of your community, and also how do you build coordinated and comprehensive approaches to ensuring that you are building capacity across the entire all the members of your ecosystem. So with that said, we do have a catalog of trainings and sessions that we are able to provide to families and also to educators, administrators, teachers, to guide you with your implementation of community schools. So the link is in the chat if you're interested. This was today, but we will be having another community schools webinar similar to this. And like we saw, we're going to be sharing some ideas. And next time we will be focusing on the co-created innovations and give you ideas on how you can engage your families to be able to do that. We also have, again, as we mentioned, our GABE Community Schools website. So all of this is going to be uploaded in there. All of the resources will be uploaded there, and we'll continue to share more resources as we continue to develop. Good question, Mayra. We'll probably have this probably by next week. It takes us a little bit to process the video and then upload the resources, but we'll probably have the video up on the website by next week. All right. I am open, available if anybody has any questions or thoughts, but if you will just do me a big favor, and I would love for us to close this session with you sharing one word, última palabra. What is one word that you leave with anything you said, something that stood out to you, or a word that you would like to share about your work with community schools, or the resources and the information that you received today. So if you'll share that either in the chat, feel free to unmute as well. Mindfulness, curiosity, self-awareness, the power of stories, hope, teamwork, mindset. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Reflection, which is critical. Without reflection, we don't learn, right? We learn through reflection. So thank you all so much for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you again at our next webinar, which we will have the information on the website. So feel free to visit after next week. We'll have the information, and like I said, it'll be in April, but we'll share the exact date with you on the website. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.